If you look a few months back, then you will see that I covered the prequel for the PlayStation 1 called Legend of Legaia. I even mentioned the Japanese version of the game because it has a few interesting differences compared to the Western version. Heck, I even mentioned the novel. But now, let's end the franchise with the sequel, Legaia 2 DUEL SAGA for the PlayStation 2. And it's quite sad to see the franchise end, but in a way I can see why it ended this early. In here you are Lang, that looks completely different from Van, a young man that is now old enough to enter the Vigilante Corps, a mercenary group that protects the small village called Knoll. Van, Lang, now goes to Hunter's Wood, where his father figure teaches him how the battle system works. That is until something terrible happens deeper in the Hunter's Wood, where a man called Avalon appears. Oh, well, at first everybody calls him Gold Eyes. He defeats Lang with ease, well, obviously, and steals the Aqualith from Lang's village. The Aqualith, also called the Sacred Azure Stone, is one of 3 artifacts that stabilize the world. Since the Aqualith provides water for Knoll, and obviously that village needs water to survive, who doesn't, Lang takes it upon himself to get it back. But no, he has no idea how important the Aqualith actually is. Well, at least at first. During his travels he meets Maya, a mute character that was imprisoned because she is a so-called mystic. Not a mystic knight. A mystic is a character that holds the power of an origin and has a birthmark to prove that, as you can see in Lang's chest. Do not ask me where Maya has her birthmark. Lang and Maya manage to flee and travel together for a while until they meet Gara, Kazan. The 3 of them travel a bit more and they meet Sharon Blade, the daughter of a legendary pirate. Further in the story they meet the final character that joins the group, Ain. But unlike the rest, he is not a mystic, which was quite interesting. Together they try to stop Avalon and his plans to kill humanity and potentially destroy the world. Look, the story is fairly generic and won't impress anyone. You have a bad dude and you have to stop him before he destroys the world. That's all it comes down to. So, yeah, well, okay, maybe the story is even a bit subpar, but honestly, I think it had a lot of potential to surpass the prequel with ease. But sadly, that wasn't meant to be, and that might also be the reason why Legaia never went anywhere big. The whole franchise. Well, of course, it also didn't help that the franchise didn't stand out all that much compared to its competition at the time as well. But for example, in Legaia 2 there is a very nice plot point where mystics supposedly are the evil of the world and seen as such mainly because a long time ago a guild wanted them all dead and managed to give mystics a real bad reputation. Meaning that specific guild was the main cause for the immense human hate towards mystics, even though in reality they are not necessarily bad people just because they are mystics, which is also why Avalon's past is relevant. This plot point could have been explored a lot more and I would have liked to see those guild members or something like that, but sadly it turned into an irrelevant piece of information throughout the story. More missed opportunities are, for example, the origin story of, well, Origins, that never becomes clear in the game. Kazan's past as a pirate is mentioned and explored a bit, but it could have gone much further, especially when it involves Sharon as well. Ain's village and especially this old man could have been used a lot more to explore ancient history, but it never happens, and many more examples. You see, it's like the developers had good ideas to make the story a good one, a really good one even, and explore the mythos in this world, but midway through they simply gave up on it and hoped that the players forget it. Sure, many interesting plot points are mentioned if you go camping and chat with your friends or revisit certain places and talk to the residents again, but overall the amount of potential the developers left behind here almost enrages me, because I would have adored the shit out of this game otherwise. But instead I just like it. I mean, I still like it a lot though. But who knows, maybe something happened behind the scenes during development that we don't know about. Maybe the budget was the problem, maybe the publisher rushed everything or something like that, I don't know. However, one thing that this game does quite well are the characters. Well, not in the way you may think though. Unlike Van, Lang actually talks. Sure, he's a generic young lad that turns into a hero, but at least he has personality. Also considering that you have a bit more opportunities to choose which answer you want to give as Lang. However, these answers don't really make that much of a difference in the progression of the game at all. It just lets you see different reactions from certain characters in that moment in time. Maya is a mute character, and honestly I thought that was a damn good idea even back then when I first played Legaia 2 in the early 2000s. Making her mute would allow her origin to talk for her, or for Maya herself to use sign language to communicate throughout the game. So I was really surprised and quite pleased when she didn't talk, and I thought she would remain silent until the end. And yes, I also think that made her kind of cute, to be honest. But sadly, she just didn't speak because of her trauma. At some point she overcomes it and starts talking again. That she overcame her trauma isn't the problem. The problem is that once she starts talking, she turns into a very generic character. Also because she's just a good girl and nothing else. Not an annoying one though, just generic. Every time I play Legaia 2, I'm always disappointed once she starts talking. Kazan is the typical wise old man that was once a swordsman but is now a pure brawler, but still turns into Lang's master in swordsmanship. Lang will use many techniques Kazan once used throughout the game as well. Kazan is actually quite a fine character overall, I don't have much to say about him. If you remember Noah from the prequel and always wanted to know what she would turn into a few years later, you know, because Noah was 12 years old or something in that game, then look no further than Sharon Blade, because she essentially is Noah just a few years later with a sword. Sure, she is a bit more mature than Noah, but she still tends to be on the goofy side and acts mainly as comic relief. Because outside of her, there is no other main character that is funny by default. And honestly, I think the game would do fine without her. Look, I understand that games feel the need to insert some kind of comedic character in their games to make it more entertaining, but there are cases where they don't need to exist at all. Sometimes subtle comedy parts are much more appealing over a character or even main character that just exists to be comic relief. Sharon is not 100% that, because she has a few serious scenes, but still, for the most part, she is that, meaning a comic relief character. Ayn, sadly, is the most bland and, well, quite honestly, most useless character. I really don't see the point in him even existing, especially when he can't even use an origin despite him being strong as shit. And since he doesn't say all that much throughout the game, I really don't see the point in him. Honestly, having just 3 characters would have been enough, like the prequel. But for whatever reason, the developers decided to add 2 more characters and make them not necessarily unlikable, but rather useless. But considering the very short length of the game, maybe there wasn't enough time to really explore the characters as well as they should have been. I mean, Sharon is somewhat explored, but Ayn really isn't. Maya lacks a bit as well as Lang himself. Kazan is the only character that manages to hold everything up in a way. But one thing that is quite nice though, despite the lack of real character development, is the interactions between these characters. Well, outside of Ayn. Especially Lang and Kazan have very nice interactions with one another inside or outside the camp. Similar goes for Maya and Sharon. Simply put, the characters work well off one another. These interactions add a lot more personality and somehow more depth to the game, even more so than the actual story. But still, Ayn is useless, and I still think that Maya should have remained a mute character throughout the game. Let's be honest here, Legaia 2 won't impress anybody when it comes to its graphics, character design or whatever, but there is something quite soothing and campy about how everything looks, especially when the developers tried to stay true to its prequel in look and feel. The landscapes were nicely done, there is attention to detail here and there. I kind of like these somewhat mute colors and a few other things. I don't know, I can always sit back and relax when playing Legaia 2, more so than the prequel. The battle animations are also quite good and everything flows nicely. Well, almost. But before I get to that, the sound is also quite nice, just like the prequel. But maybe a bit less memorable though. One thing that is different are the voices. The prequel kept the Japanese voices for all characters, even in the Western version, but here all characters were dubbed. I mean, I kind of understand why. There are a few scenes in the game where the characters actually talk, beyond screaming their attacks, but really they should have kept the Japanese original and add subs instead. Especially when in the grand scheme of things, there aren't that many sequences in the game where the characters actually talk. Because the voice dub quality in Legaia 2 is bad, real bad at times. It's like the localizers asked their family members that never dubbed anything in their lives to dub the characters, and this was the result. I mean, when they scream their attacks or do some battle noises, then they are kind of passable, but as soon as they say actual sentences, then you want to mute your damn TV. Now the almost final, but probably the most important part, battle system. Legaia 2 continues the directional command input from Legend of Legaia, meaning if you press up the character attacks high, if you press down the character attacks low, and so on. Depending on the enemy, you might miss a hit or two. If the enemy is flying, of course you shouldn't do low attacks, and yeah, By doing these combos, you will unlock arts, which will do more damage to the enemies or maybe even add an attack or two. Every move is separated by a block and your limitation is the amount of blocks you can use per round. Reaching a certain level will add more blocks you can use. Normal attacks fill up your AP meter for a general max of 100. And this time around, defending will not increase your AP bar like it does in the prequel. Super arts use your AP, but they are more powerful than normal arts. Hyper arts can only be learned by finding specific items that unlock these. These arts are the only ones that can unlock new, more powerful arts by using them in battle and gaining XP. Legaia 2 added variable arts, which essentially are a combo attack between two characters of your choice. You have to pay attention though, because this can only work if one character uses his red variable art while the other uses his violet variable art. Finally, there are mystic arts. If you somehow found the directional combination for these, then you will need a full AP bar and lose 1/2 of your total HP to be able to use these. But mystic arts are beyond powerful, especially since the character and his origin attack together, which is why Ein doesn't have a mystic art, since he is not a mystic. Usually arts can be combined together, so you can save up a few slots and maybe add another art on top of it. However, for example, hyper arts can only be combined if all other normal or super arts come after it and never before. And to add to it, Maya is the only character that cannot combine arts together at all. I mean, since she takes advantage of her magic skills, her attacks can be very powerful by nature. At least if you consider the attributes of the enemies, of course. Unlike in Legend of Legaia, you cannot capture enemies and use them in battle. Here you use your origins directly, which is... well, it's cool, but it would have been nice to have the option to do both. Meaning expand the simplistic origin system this game has by maybe adding or even reinventing the Seiru system from the original. These origins also level up and learn new attacks as well, but not that many. However, their animations lack quite a bit. It seems to me that the origin attacks could have looked more impressive, but instead they look a bit boring, which is quite the contrary when it comes to the arts themselves. They look quite nice and even precise. Heck, you could do these moves in real life, just fucking try it. But the developers should have done a few things differently. For one, no matter what kind of art the character uses, he always goes into slow motion to then attack. I mean, Legend of Legaia did a similar thing, but only when the characters have used that attack for the very first time. In Legaia 2, they always slow down like this, each time they use an art, and that affects the flow of the battle a bit. Sure, you get used to it, and I think it actually looks quite cool when, for example, Lang is preparing his body and mind to use that attack, but it would have been nice if it didn't slow down this much. Another thing is the flow between arts. Kazan is a good example where you combine arts together to make the max amount of damage, of course. And while the flow from art to art can be quite nice and fast at times, some can be unnecessarily slow because the character always has to go back to its fighting stance before the art animation even happens. Maya is probably the worst offender here. I mean, just look at this. Instead of the art happening as soon as she screams the name of it, she always has to go back to her fighting position before the attack even happens. It's a bit annoying to see this at times, which is why, for the most part, I used Maya as a healer instead of a fighter, despite her strong magic attacks. Look, I am not saying that the battle system is bad or necessarily worse than prequel. In fact, the battle system is a lot of fun. It's just that I needed to speed it up a bit and not let the camera linger this long on the character before the move hits the enemy. The origins themselves aren't bad either, but it would have been really nice if they added the enemy capture system from the first game as well. The difficulty of the game is rather mid at best, meaning the game isn't really all that hard to beat. Heck, the game isn't all that long either. You can easily beat it in around, I don't know, 30 hours or so. Of course, if you don't do side quests or whatever. But here is one thing where Legaia 2 absolutely beats the prequel to oblivion. Because the amount of content it has is quite nice and it uses its world map more efficiently. Of course, the camping and chat system contribute to this as well, but I am mainly talking about that Legaia 2 has an arena, has an auction house, lots of minigames, getting nicknames. Well, that's something only for completionists, but still fun to get. Side missions you get from the guild, unlocking new scenes by revisiting places you've already been, even though you don't need to go there ever again. Gardening, decorating, new special areas to unlock to get special items and take advantage of the infinite money making scheme, if you know how to do that, etc. And don't worry, you will be able to fly later on as well. I also really like that this game has a few more puzzles than the prequel, and a few of those will make you think for a bit. Also, you have to use your origins to progress through some areas as well, and in this case even Ein will be helpful. You know, for example, Galea, which is Lang's origin, can punch rocks out of the way, or Rivas, which is Maya's origin, will bring life to vines so you can climb them, and so on. Look, Legend of Legaia might overall be a slightly better game, and yes, Legaia's 2 story and character development might be lacking, but overall it still is a light-hearted adventure with a fun battle system, quests, music and nice character interactions. It's just sad the game, or even both games for that matter, were flooded by superior JRPGs and thus never really had a chance to make some kind of impact, at the time at least. But hey, on the other hand, being the underdog sometimes works better, and both Legaia games are the underdog.